So, how do you breathe when you're living underwater?
Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendan Traxler.
So, I want to start another series where we're talking about the different elements of what it takes to live, work, exist in underwater habitats. And so, for one of the first ones here, we're going to talk about is the main thing, but us as humans need, which is oxygen. And where does oxygen come from when you're living in an underwater habitat? Oxygen is our lifeline. We have to have it. It has to be one of those things where we can't question it. It can't be some things like lights. We can do without lights for a little bit. We can do without electricity for a little bit, but we can't do without air. We can do without water for a little bit, but after a prolonged period of time, you know, there are detriments to our health when it comes to not having oxygen. So, where does it come from when we're living in an underwater habitat? One method that's commonly discussed is through electrolysis, which is when we're actually splitting the water around us, the atoms apart, and pulling the oxygen out of the water. Since water is H2O, which is hydrogen and oxygen, we're easily, but it's doable where you can split those apart. Plus, then you have a byproduct of hydrogen, which can be used for energy, can be sold off to generate revenue or different types of stuff. That is when you're looking long term, that's the best way. Obviously, let's step back a little bit. How it's been done in the past has always been it's been pumped in from the surface, whether through tubes or whatever. That's how you get your oxygen. Now, a lot of places will have additional air tanks fastened around for backups, for emergency, whatever. But in the past, it's always been through tubes or hoses coming down from the surface. Looking long term, we need to be looking at other solutions. And electrolysis is by far the preferred one. It's a technology that's ever growing. I think that as we advance further into the underwater world, where we have people living and depending upon it, we're going to see more and more movement on that front. You look at submarines, naval submarines, and how they produce oxygen. And obviously they have a nuclear generator that's got a lot of energy there to be able to do this. But that's one of the ways they produce their oxygen as well, as through this method. But then what do you do with all this air? Because you do want to save some in case of emergency or in case the system breaks down. Obviously, you want redundancies as well, but you would have canisters, you'd have air tanks, you'd have all this different type of stuff to store your oxygen. One other way that you can make this stretch a little bit further is through either regenerating oxygen, scrubbing it. That's something else that's used in submarines as well as different things. Is scrubbing the CO2 out of it. Plants. That's basically what plants do. Is they scrub that from us and then generate oxygen as well. Obviously, for a habitat, you would need a large area of plants able to do this, but that is something that could be done on a larger basis. If you had, as ASC, we talk about having pods. You would have to have several like greenhouse pods to be able to generate the type of oxygen you need, as well as scrubbing. But I believe that is something that we'll be looking at down the future as well. Algae is another area, and with us being underwater, using it. Lloyd Godson, I believe that was his name. He had a underwater house that he kind of built, and he was and one of the things on it was they had an algae scrubber basically built into it, where it's inside, and it was scrubbing the CO2 out from the oxygen that was in there, and able to let him reuse what was in there even longer. So looking at different technologies like that will help us along the way. Charcoal has been used for scrubbing out impurities and other air aspects in the air, because you want pure air or clean air, not pure air. That always good, but clean air. And one of the benefits of that is obviously your health. So one of the things that we can tout when it comes to underwater habitats is the cleanest air available. So your health is going to benefit from it too. And obviously, I'm getting off a little of a side tangent here, but when we're looking at oxygen and the air that we breathe, um, where are you going to get a better, unless you're in space in some place that has that controlled oxygen, where are you going to get a better breath in than living underwater, where your air is going to be the cleanest, the purest available, especially if you're already stripping it straight from the source and the water itself through electrolysis, and then cleansing it with algae or plants or whatever like that. That being said, when you're dealing with CO2 and you're dealing with all this everything, you do need to keep a certain balance in there. Too much oxygen obviously becomes flammable and can become its own problem. And not enough oxygen can also be a problem. So you have to find that balance, and obviously sensors and that comes into play there as well. And as I said, having reservoirs and backups just in case, because you always want a redundancy when you're living underwater, is ideal. So that's where you would have those tanks or some other sort of area that has a backup air supply. Obviously, here at the beginning, we'll be close enough to go to the surface in case of a major emergency like that, where you lost total air supply for whatever reason. But as we're looking forward and we're looking at new initiatives and people venturing out into the ocean, and as we start building colonies and larger habitats underwater, we have to find better ways of doing this. And as I've said multiple times, the technology will come as we start putting people in those locations. It's going to be expensive at first, but like anything, as we progress it and we move forward, the technology prices will come down and the ease of that technology will come with it. So that's why I got on probably a really quick down and dirty on oxygen and how it looks as far as living underwater, especially as ASC here, as we look at talking about living in the surface level pressure, 1 atmosphere underwater habitat, where we're wanting to keep it the same pressure as what's on land. That kind of changes things up versus being an ambient pressure underwater habitat. But that's a completely other topic. So this is something I'm starting to do. And I want people's feedback on this, because if this topic here and any of the topics that we discuss here on ASC, if you want a deeper dive into that, if you want a longer, more factual, information-driven podcast, VOD, whichever it may be, a live stream even, let me know. Shoot me a message, comment on this wherever you may find it. And as always, thank you for checking out Colonize the Ocean podcast, Atlantis Sea Colony. And my question to you, because I like to try to leave people with a question at the end of all these, is if you were having your underwater habitat, what would be your, let me put it this way. Say you've got your dream underwater habitat, you've just built it, you're building it the way that you want it to being, money's not an option type of thing. What would be your main and your failover? Would you go first with oxygen coming straight from the surface versus an umbilical, or would you try to go the electrolysis route and then have like an umbilical as a backup, or would you just solely have tanks as a backup so that you have zero surface footprint from an oxygen standpoint?